And just like that, we're live. Are we connected to the internet? Yeah, we're good. Sorry about that.
Well, she told Rivera that their relationship was only going to be professional, that they were going to be good friends and good comrades and great artistic companions. Well, one late afternoon, while they were lying in bed after some romantic encounter, she was looking at the paintings that are in her paintings that are in the room, and she says, Diego, do you ever think I'm going to be as good an artist as you are? And he says, well, you're already a better artist than I am. And she says, well, how can you possibly say something like that? You're so incredible. And he says, well, look, when I paint what I see. But when you paint from your heart. Well, you obviously know who I'm talking about, right? Because you brought your Frida Kahlo book with you today. Oh yeah, it's so good to see all of them here. Isn't that wonderful? Okay. I tried two things. I tried communicating through the official Ministry of Culture and Secretary was Lydia, and then I tried the Facebook thing, which I think everyone has like abandoned me on Facebook.
Facebook thing?
Mm-hmm.
What Facebook thing?
I put an advertisement.
None of us
Didn't
saw
see it? Big blue box.
I did actually.
And ignored it,
Michael.
right? Deleted it.
Wait, what?
It says Kahlo Hickey Hayden, and it says 4/4,
Okay.
10 a.m.
Well,
No, what does it say? Turn up and tune in, right? I thought that was real clever.
yeah, but Facebook has algorithms that hide certain posts, so it's Facebook's fault if we didn't see it.
Algorithms?
Yes.
I-
People are aware of this.
I'm pretty sure that the algorithms are self-inflicted, right?
Maybe partly.
Yeah.
Involuntary or indirectly.
Is that true, really?
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to call Mark and see if I can fix some of that.
Well, they also harvest data, so don't trust
Yeah.
them.
Oh, I don't care about that. No, I really don't. I have no secrets. As a matter of fact, if they harvest all the data about my life, the world would be in such turmoil. Right? No. Well, at any rate, I'm talking about Frida Kahlo. And she's a really remarkable person. And had a very interesting life, I think. And when she struck up her relationship with Diego Rivera, and who was he? Do you know who he was at all? Oh, that's good. Do you know anything about... I normally don't do this because I find it so boring, and because you can actually read it out of a book if you're interested in reading it out of a book. And then if you read one book, you can also question the veracity of that, and you can go to another book. And then you can put the information together, and then you have a history of Mexico. Now look, it just suddenly dawned on me that it might occur to some people, although not too many, that my talking about Mexico might have some kind of current ramifications. But I assure you that I had long since decided to talk about this before the current situation became so inflamed. But having said that, I think it is highly appropriate, and you know, I'm fulfilling the whatever cultural relevancy or whatever. What do you know about Mexico? First time I went to Mexico, I was 4 years old, 4.5 years old. And my parents dropped me off at the Rio Grande and said, "See you later." No, they did not do that. You know anything about
Is that
Mexico?
how you got the name Ford?
Yes. No one knows anything about Mexico?
There's a lot of organized crime there.
Oh.
It doesn't really have anything to do with
I'm talking about the history of Mexico.
It was
Yeah,
once
there
upon
was-
a time a Spanish colony.
Yeah.
No. Well, all right, let's start with that then. When was the Spanish conquest of, some people call it the Americas, I call it Mexico.
Way
Sometime-
before the British conquest.
Sometime
Really
between 10,000 BC and present day.
Wow.
That's a rather wide range there.
Early 1500s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Early 1500s, I think between, I don't remember exactly, but I think it's like either 1519 or between 1519 and 1521, something around like that. So that puts it squarely within what? What European epoch?
The Reformation.
What in the world?
I'm 200 years behind, sorry.
Yeah, not the Enlightenment, the what?
No, the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. Yeah,
Renaissance.
the Renaissance.
High Renaissance. Actually, the Renaissance began in what century?
The 1300s.
What did you say?
14th century.
Yes, the late 14th century. And then it came to a rather remarkable crescendo. Isn't it interesting I use the musical terms, right, to make it like music? Right, in the 15th and the 16th century, right? What other important things in European culture or Western culture, I call it European culture, happened during the 16th century? Large-scale things. Going into the 17th century, you should know this,
Wait, are you talking about cultural things or like political things?
anything.
Okay.
Which 1500s?
Late 1500s, 1600s.
Spain got really powerful,
Uh,
obviously.
Florentine Camerata.
the what revolution? The scientific revolution. All right. Okay. What was so revolutionary about that? Don't answer that question. All right. Let's go back to Mexico.
Okay.
All right. What do you know about Mexico? Well, we've established the fact that the Spaniards overran it in the first 2 decades of the 16th century. 16th century, 1519 to 1521, something like that. So that was
Aztecs and Mayans and stuff.
what?
Aztecs and Mayans and
Ah, the Aztec civilization, the Mayan civilization. Now, do you know anything about those people? How far does the Aztec civilization go by? I don't see any digital devices being utilized here. Contrary to popular opinion, I don't think iPhones or any kind of digital device is bad for your health. As a matter of fact, I think the more you use them, probably the better you'll become.
From 1300 to 1521.
The 1300?
1300 BC or 80?
It says 80.
Okay.
Triple Alliance
stuff.
stuff.
You're looking at Aztecs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a weird coincidence that they ended on 1521.
Oh, weird
Yeah.
coincidence.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very, very much a coincidence.
Super.
And that is the only thing you know about the history of the people in Mexico.
They like to rip people's hearts out and show them to the person before they died.
Yeah, they had some pretty
Mhm.
awful customs.
And they had these cool whistles that were shaped like a skull, and when you whistle into it, it sounds like a guy screaming.
Those are all delightful facts.
The territory was very different.
What?
The territory was very different than it looks today as well, like, especially after it was colonized. Like, it extended way up, covered like the west coast and a little east as well.
What covered it?
The territory of Mexico, like, used to be much bigger after the Spanish.
You mean during the colonial
Yeah,
period?
in the colonial
Yes.
era.
Didn't
Right.
the Aztecs build their city essentially on a marsh
Oh,
and
yeah.
then build aqueducts and all sorts of technology like that?
That's one of the things, yes. One of the things. Are you sure that started in 1300?
It says it.
I think
Right.
the beginning of their history is kind of nebulous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the peak from, like.
What does the evolutionary record suggest about the origin of the indigenous people in Mexico?
Africa?
Well, that's an interesting point. If everyone came out of Africa, how did they get to Mexico?
Land bridge?
I think that notion went out when plate tectonics came in. Who was the inventor of plate tectonics?
Think of the universal constants and forces.
Who came up with that idea? Alfred Wegener. Look, if I'm 1,000 years old and I can remember things like this, don't you think you should be aware of some of these things? You are, yes. You're all taught this in grammar school. And you've just forgotten it, yeah? No, not by land bridge, although that might be partially true. Where did,
Did they come from some of the populations in South America that had been around for much longer? Like from some sort of like migration?
I think that's
north?
reverse engineering, isn't it?
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about way back then. Have you ever been to the museum? This is way off track, which is not unusual, but have you ever been to the Museum of Natural History in New York? Have you seen the exhibition, which is updated practically every day or two, on the migratory patterns of the hominid species? Have you looked at that exhibit? It's a remarkable thing. I suggest that you do a little bit of research and find out where the indigenous Mexican people came from. What are the antecedents of, current day Mexican people? They have a rich and ancient history. And that ties directly with what Rivera and Orozco and what's the other one? Squiero, the three mural painters of the 20s. Right, by the way, when was colonialism in Mexico thwarted? Anybody? You don't know anything about the history of Mexico? What?
1840s.
Yes! Yes, I think for some reason that date, 1837, sticks in my mind, but that could, please, that's an approximation. What in Europe was going on at that time?
Beethoven.
Not quite, but maybe.
Second Napoleon.
Yes, Napoleon, right? And Napoleon's idea, which rapidly deteriorated, basically like it did in Mexico and other places. Napoleon's ideas were a product of what? Other movement that came before Napoleon.
French Revolution.
What?
French Revolution.
And the French Revolution is a product of the
American Revolution? The Enlightenment.
Enlightenment.
Oh, thank God I come back.
The Enlightenment. Okay? All right, so those are extensions of the Enlightenment, right? Okay, well, the uprising in Mexico was in the 19th century, believe it or not. And so what happened between 1837 and 1910? Now, I'll tell you a secret. I I know a lot about Mexico. I've known a lot about Mexico since I was a little boy because I went there many times with my parents. However, all of these details did not like stick in my memory like that. So I have, for the past couple of months or whatever, since the summer, reviewed information about Mexico. So don't be under any impression that I'm like a encyclopedia or something, which I don't think would ever occur to you. But, you know, I do know some things about it, and some dates stick in my mind. But what happened around 1910 in Mexico?
The Mexican Revolution.
Yes, the most current Mexican Revolution, or the 20th century revolution. And what was its intention, and what had happened after the break with Spain? That which happened in the, I would say, let's say mid-19th century to the first decade of the 20th century. What had happened through its independence? Like so many countries that strive for their independence and freedom from the authoritarian hand of other governments, that's the whole history of colonialism, is it not? Look at the breakup of the British Empire. Some of those things were like very bloody and awful transitions, and some of them were failed attempts and led directly back to the kind of authoritarian control of the colonial times. Is that not what happened in Mexico? What was the government right before the upsurge in 1910, the revolution? Was it a democratic government?
Isn't there like a,
What?
isn't the monarch, like, I forgot, it's the Diaz.
Dictatorship.
President
Diaz.
Diaz.
How do you know all this?
Because I learned it in school.
Yeah, but you went to school in New York, right? That's unfair. Well, I went to school in Atlanta, Georgia. Right. And we learned all that stuff. Believe it or not. Right?
We studied Mexico.
All right, so it was a dictatorship, and the dictator was overthrown, and the idea was to restore the Constitution to the original intentions, which was a more democratic kind of government. And so what happened after the revolution of 1910? These are all general and broad things. There was an upsurge of interest in who the Mexican people really were. Their antecedents, the indigenous people of Mexico. And so consequently, the Minister of Education and Cultural Ministries set about to educate the people through art and through music, which I think is a very suspicious topic, right, or an endeavor about their heritage. And it is into that environment that these three great muralists appeared. Diego was a very, very famous artist. So was Orozco and I think I'm pronouncing their names right, and Scriero. Those were the three big muralists. And Frida Kahlo came in on the coattails of Rivera. She was educated at the prep school in Mexico City. This all takes place around Mexico City. And she first went to see Rivera when he was painting a mural for that school. And she brought with her some paintings and said, if you have a spare moment, look at these paintings and you see if I have any potential as an artist. And he kind of apparently blew that off, but at the end of the day, she had left them on the ground, and he came down from the scaffold, and on his way out, he wasn't going to pay any attention to them, and they caught his eye. And that is one of, if you've read any writings of Rivera, he always says that, art has to catch your eye before it does anything else. And it's remarkable that that little phrase appears in what? A reading assignment for today, does it not?
Maybe
Right?
the very end.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think that was a failed effort. I don't know, but it did generate a particular style of artistic expression. And if you looked at any of the Kahlo paintings in that book, right, how would you characterize them? What's the first word that would come to you? And we can do hair splitting and call in an art expert and go through the various micro phases of Kahlo's progression as an artist. How would you describe her work?
Emotional.
Oh yeah.
Kind of surrealist.
Why? What are those? Well, I know what the term emotional is, right? But we have to kind of narrow it down specifically to what it means for her. Remember what Diego said to her. I paint what I see. You paint from your heart, right? So that covers the emotional part.
There's
rather
something about
specifically.
them that's like very, like, coming from like I want to say folksy sort of, because they're not like.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I have a whole bunch of things I want to look at. What's on page 11? Is that where you... Oh yeah, here we go.
A picture of her dressed in blue clothes.
Yeah, I did want to say that. I did want to talk about that. Kahlo is one of the most, well, they're all interesting. Rothko is terribly interesting. Picasso is actually really interesting. Jackson Pollock is monumentally interesting. So is his wife, Lee Krasner, who tried to do some of her art a couple of years ago. But genuine artists have kind of a repertoire, standard repertoire of features. But Kahlo is extraordinary as an artist. And she's one of the very few, yes, one of the very few. Look at this family portrait. She's down there. She's the man that's in the middle there, right? That's Frida Kahlo. She frequently dressed up in men's clothes, and her wonderful father, used to say, "Oh, well, I always wanted a son." Now, that says something about her, and this is just not one instance of that. She was like this a lot, and I think it says something about her notion, and she's one of the very few people that have this kind of mental enlightenment, which I think it is an enlightenment, that she is not defined by some kind of preconceived sense of sexuality. If there's any person that was a genuine woman, it was, whatever that means, it was Frida Kahlo. But she was not tied to any kind of stereotypical sexual identity. And what that means is that her identity is not tied to those psychological constructions. And in human beings, remember, we've discussed this before, unlike the animal world, human beings process sensory information in an abstract way. And they contribute to psychological constructions that contribute to either fluidly or very rigidly to psychological identity. And we just talked about last week a movie in which the rigidity of psychological accumulation is destructive. Well, in the case of Kahlo, it's the exact opposite. And she's one of the very, very few people. There are other artists throughout, if you take the time to look at it. And there have been a number of studies that are kind of off the mark, but within them they talk about these kind of people that are open. And I do believe that the immediacy of Kahlo's art and her exuberance and her passion and her heartfelt, emotional connection to life is represented in her kind of psychological openness. All right, and look on the facing page. That is her father. And does he look Mexican? If there's such a thing as looking Mexican.
Is he German?
He's German.
Hungarian.
Kahlo is a German name, yes. He was an architectural photographer and very skilled in all kinds of things. And Kahlo was very close to her father. Right, now let's look at page 49 next. All the while you should be looking at her art. I mean, what do you think about her art? How about this? 49. How would you describe that?
Seems like the most.
This is one of her, she says it's one of her most profound paintings. Actually, this little monograph, if you take the time to read it, you need a magnifying glass to read it, is really beautifully written. It's excellent. Really, really terrific. This is one of,
This whole thing?
what? Yes.
Never heard someone say on one little piece of text is terrific.
What?
I didn't realize anyone could say that the little description of the painting was terrific. It's good, that's great.
Is it said, does it say that?
Are you
You
talking-
said that.
I said it? I didn't understand that.
Are you talking about the caption?
No, I'm talking about the
Like I
painting.
said.
I don't care about the caption.
The description or whatever it was.
So basically her nurse had to breastfeed her because her mother couldn't. Which her sister
Well,
was born.
what is it?
Great.
Without reading the text, what's the impression that you get from that?
That all that the nurse does is breastfeed. She's got
Well,
a
look
mask
at
on.
that. That's Frida.
Yes.
You know,
Is
she
that-
always painted with the eyebrows most of the time with
Maybe,
it,
bro.
with it knitted together like
Yeah.
that. That's symbolic.
Well, she has an adult face.
Yes,
Which is bizarre.
it's an adult in a child's body.
And also the depiction of the nurse, like.
Well, wait a minute. Let's don't fly off of that.
Okay.
Right? In what style of painting does this make reference to any kind of, does it make an historical connection to?
Renaissance baby Jesus?
Yes, of
Girl
course.
face.
Or even medieval
Oh.
paintings, where the baby Christ or Jesus is painted as like an adult,
Yeah.
a miniature
Don't know how to
adult,
paint
right?
baby faces yet.
It's a definite reference to that, right? And then it's a kind of a baby's body, vaguely. But that's no head of a baby, it's an adult head. Okay, and she's breastfeeding, but not from her mother. That looks like some kind of what?
Wet nurse?
Obviously.
Looks.
Do they look Finnish? Is that a Finnish wet nurse?
No, it looks like an indigenous person.
Yes, it's an indigenous person.
And also on the breast, the tree. I don't know. I think it's kind of like an homage to literally the earth or the people, that why she exists.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I actually didn't feel like it was cold, this painting.
You know, the caption says it's cold.
Well, it is remote. I don't think it's realistic in any sense. But if you look at the Renaissance paintings of Madonna and Child, and you look at also, well, maybe this is not fair, but the Pietà, where Mary is holding the Christ that's been taken off of the cross. They're filled with kind of passion, yeah? And usually Mary is not staring out into space, is she? She would be like a mother looking down at her child, right? Well, you don't get that here. And what about before we go any further than that, what about the composition itself? Is there any perspective in it, per se?
No.
Really? Is the figure of the wet nurse, is that completely flat?
I
There's
mean-
shading.
There's no,
That's not what I would consider perspective, though. It's a little bit of foreshortening, perhaps, and the sense of foreground.
Well, I
background,
group,
but I think as well.
I sometimes consider both of those things as a kind of perspective. It certainly isn't, 3-point perspective like that. Definitely not. So the nursemaid, and I don't know whether you can consider Kahlo there any kind of, it's not completely flat, I don't think. But what about the background itself?
there's no like vanishing point or anything.
No,
And it's like
there's
I
none
can't
of that, right?
Well, there is a sense of what's further forward and what's further back.
Yeah, a little bit,
A little bit.
yeah, just a tiny bit, but the stars come down into the foliage, right?
Are they stars or are they raindrops?
Yeah, I thought they were raindrops.
It was milk.
Or is it milk? Or are they stars?
I don't think they're stars.
Because
I think
it's
they're
cloudy.
liquid.
Yeah, that appears to be overcast.
They also appear on
They're coming off the leaves.
Yeah.
So you think that's rain? Or
Yeah,
milk?
rain, but also kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of like all.
Well, don't they look exactly like the drops of milk coming out of the nursemaid's breast?
Yeah.
The rain gives life to the world, and the milk gives life to.
That would oracle.
Whatever, yes.
You got
But
the same
also,
parallel between the
Is that the
two
kind of,
extremes.
is that the kind of setting that she would be nursed in the middle of a rainforest or something like that?
Of course.
What does that symbolize then?
Growth.
Not a connection to her mother.
It's a connection with her past.
With the past of Mexico, yes. She considered herself an indigenous person. That was the whole movement. The art movement is trying to resuscitate the original people of Mexico. Their ties to,
she's not really. Her father's German.
well, it's a fantasy, but we'll believe it.
She identifies
Fancy.
one.
Her father's German.
Yes, but she was very much thought of herself as, being Mexican
That's fine.
in the native sense.
wanted
And
to be
on one side, I guess she was.
That's
From,
right.
from her
Fancy.
mother.
But we're
Yeah.
missing another detail in this painting that I think is
The
important.
large pale leaf on the side.
What?
The leaf on the right side.
Yeah,
Or
well,
the,
there are things like that. That's an odd thing.
Table.
But what else about the nursemaid?
well, her face.
Mask.
Yeah.
That's not a face, is it? It's a mask. Yeah? So it's something that's hiding the humanity or the identity of the face. And the face is actually looking right out, straight out, right? And this is where the art critics think that this is a reference to the fact that her mother was a kind of confusing personality, And isn't there a statement in here somewhere that talks about her mother? Let's see if I can remember where that is. Go back to page 11 where she talks about her family. Yeah, here it is. Frida's ambivalent feelings toward her mother, whom she described as very kind,
Oh, yeah.
active, and intelligent, but also as calculating, cruel, and fanatically religious. Well, some of those qualities we saw in Tanya's mother, but not exactly to this extreme. And, all right, okay, well, I think that's an interesting painting, and it's kind of characteristic of her work. What page is that? 49. Now let's look at page 18. What is a retablo? See it down there at the bottom? It says retablo. What is that? Anybody know?
Train crash.
No,
Okay.
it's
No, retablo is not a train crash. Yes,
It's like a holy
yes.
word.
Like a, I don't know.
It's a votive like icon, right? Little image. When
It's like a thing in a frame, and it's like sculpted, but it has like a frame thing that
framed,
frame.
yes,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
It's like something that's set up to, instill devotion, right? Kahlo was obsessed with those things. You find them really in what period, essentially? Where do they originate?
Renaissance? Medieval?
Medieval times, yeah. Okay. I was going to say something and I forgot it. How unusual.
You
Alright.
find them like on candles.
What?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
they're on candles, like Mexican candle, right? Like that's where
Votive
votive
candle?
candles. But they're taller and they always have like the Virgin Mary. Yes.
They look kind of mass produced.
Yeah.
They can, yeah. They
Okay.
certainly can, right? And so this is a painting from a votive, right? That depicts what?
The Blessed Virgin Mary and a train crash. And some
Who is that under the train and the bus?
Frida.
Well,
That is Frida Kahlo.
she.
Are you reading as we go along? That's one way to get you to read this. Frida suffered a catastrophic accident coming home from the prep school. And she and her boyfriend, Alejandro, whatever his name is, right? You know that Kahlo wanted to be a doctor, or she was going into medicine somehow. But at this prep school, I mean, she was extremely intelligent, like a lot of these people, very well educated. And she knew philosophy, she knew science, she knew literature. Oh, I know what I was going to say. There's a Dostoevsky story of, it's called The Meek One. We're going to do Dostoevsky, I think, next year, some of his works. And there's a great short story called The Meek One. Well, this man marries this woman just to marry her, and he essentially ignores her. And eventually, he comes home one day and he finds that she's jumped out of the window, and she's holding a votive with the Virgin Mary. I just thought I'd make that connection. That doesn't mean anything. Okay? All right, well, here's Frida under the bus. Someone's thrown her under the bus, and it practically killed her. I'm surprised, given the nature of that accident, that she actually survived. But it crushed her, not crushed, but it severely damaged her pelvis, her legs, her spine was severely compromised, and she was in a body cast for months. And it's during that time that she began to take her, she had all that time flat on her back, take her painting a little more seriously. But that was a catastrophic event in her life. Was that the first catastrophic event in her life?
No.
No. What was the first?
Polio at 6.
Polio, at age 6, I think. Now, I grew up in the 1850s when polio was 1950s, when polio was a very hot topic. There was a young girl that lived down the street from us, and she was stricken with polio very early on, and it deformed her unbelievably. Well, if Kahlo was deformed somewhat in her right, was it her right leg that kind of withered away and also caused problems with her right foot, and those problems were to persist in her life. It's just amazing that all these things happened to her and she did what she did. Maybe they have something to do with what she did. At any rate, that's a depiction of that particular event in her life. Now let's look at the painting on the opposite side. It has that same kind of characteristic, yeah? Is there any perspective in that, or
A little bit.
foreshortening?
Not in the foreground so much. It looks very flat, but you see the road going to a vanishing point behind the.
Yeah, there is that. But what about the people?
They look incredibly flat.
They are very flat.
They look like cutouts or something.
They don't even look like they're seated, really.
No, they don't even look like they're seated. That's a very, very good.
There is a little bit of shading on some of them.
Tiny bit in the costumes. It's very medieval, though, I think.
Mm.
What about the position of that basket that the woman has over there? And what about the scarf around the woman on the opposite end?
Mm.
Those are all compositional features,
Mm.
right? Trying to open up the space, I think.
Is
But-
the bus moving?
What?
They're sitting on a bus, right?
Oh, I thought they were at a bus stop.
Oh, maybe.
They're at a bus
Okay,
stop,
okay.
right? Hopefully not getting on the bus that is about to crash. It's interesting people, right? Does it tell you what the people are?
Kind of.
You can sort of see.
The first woman is what?
Frida.
A what? Housewife, and then a worker, and then a mother. And it says it's what? An indigenous Indian woman breastfeeding her baby. Quite a bit different from the painting of the Indian woman breastfeeding Kahlo, Frida. A young boy, turned the opposite direction, of course. The bourgeois, or the middle class person, and a young woman
Yeah, that's the
who apparently looks like Kahlo. She was always putting herself in things.
But this one doesn't have the eyebrows,
Yeah.
so why did I
thought
think it's her?
I thought the person on the left would be.
Oh, maybe.
It's still not really the unibrow,
No.
it's at least thicker eyebrows.
I think it's a stretch to imagine that as Kahlo. At any rate, look how tall the woman is.
Yeah. And
Frida
she has
Kahlo
both
is
her
really
legs.
short.
And
Very,
she-
very short.
She's not physically deformed or anything like Kahlo would have been.
No,
I don't think that's.
no, that doesn't come across. Okay, all right. Well, have we passed page 23? No. Let's go back to page 23. Ah. This is a wedding portrait. Right. And I think it's a fantastic painting, and it's pretty representative of her, her essential style, I think. Now, what do you have to say about this?
Tuxedo with a canvas belt and brown boots.
Great sense of style.
And blue shirt.
But look at the relationship between Frida and Diego. That she was short. Then she might have actually been that short. But
Everything about her is significantly smaller, especially the feet.
yes, right. It's like weird, don't you think?
Yeah. Looks like the
Look at his expression.
He's not even looking at her.
Well, neither of them are looking at one another.
No.
They're both looking at us.
Yeah.
But he's even turned away a little bit.
He's turned away, but I think his body's turned away.
He
while his
looks
face is,
sinister.
like,
He's asking us, are you a communist? That's what he's saying. But look at how do you know he's a painter?
People's tools. It's pretty obvious.
Right. Now, if you held a palette like that with the brushes in it, would they be in that position?
No.
No, unless they're glued together.
Well, I mean, if you have enough brushes, then maybe big enough that it wouldn't fall
Yes,
through.
yes.
They're only 4.
Not.
It's not really.
You can see the open space around them.
All right, well,
I mean, if it's at the right angle and there's
Yeah.
no friction, you might be able to
Okay.
leverage it.
it could be, but if you'll notice, if you look carefully, there's open space underneath where the brushes are.
Those brushes would.
It doesn't fill the entire space. At any rate, it's just a comment.
He's very
Right.
pigeon-toed.
Look at the way she's, I think the book talks about this, but look at the position of her hand on his hand.
Mm.
Don't you all want to get to a place where you can look at the, oh, are there books over there in the cabinet?
We have.
Oh, you have? Okay. I don't know, the miracle of modern science, okay. All right,
He's not
I'll take a
actually holding her hand. She's
No.
just kind of propping it on top of his.
yes, it's like very
Bizarre.
tenuous, yeah? What does that say about her? Does it say that she's afraid of him?
Mhm.
She's very reserved and private.
But her hand is also on top. Like, I don't know, she's like exerting some sort of control, or not allowing herself to be open or something.
I think she's just making them look more like individuals by like these differences, and also not quite like it's a wedding portrait, so obviously together, but everything is kind of separate about them at the same time.
But the scale of everything is so dramatic, right? He is so enormous, of like King Kong or something. Those enormous shoes, that's bigger than her head, right?
Something about the angle of her hand looks wrong. Like I can't quite find where her arm would be.
Well, of course.
Oh, I thought she's like turned a bit diagonally.
Yeah, but
She
then
is.
somehow she's
Shoulder and-
coming around in front. Like there's something just slightly off about it.
Right. And she
You know,
appears
it
to
just
be
looks a
behind
little-
him.
Yeah, exactly.
Her hand
Like
is
somehow the
behind him.
hand's going behind, but then also in front, like one of those
Oh, yeah.
impossible staircase paintings.
Oh.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's an important detail. And what about her feet? Does it sound? Do they look like she's like firmly planted on the ground?
Well, they're facing forward, and she's like the rest of her is turned to the side. So
That's strange.
maybe
isn't
that's
it?
the way it would have looked with her, like everything that happened. But it's weird.
Does it say anything about how she feels about Rivera?
A key, something. There's a sort of.
Does the book say what that text
Hang on a
is
second.
somewhere?
Um,
Is it just like a generic wedding text, or is there?
No, she always wrote text that
where does it talk
are
about
appropriate to the situation. Does it
I
translate
can't
that?
read it. It's too small.
It's interesting that she doesn't also portray herself as an artist. She's merely like the wife of an artist.
Yes,
Which is weird.
yes. She was always in awe of his great talent and of his great technical ability. And she always, at least at this point, considered herself a student or a protege of Rivera. And I think this is an homage to her respect for him and his great stature as a great Mexican artist. Okay. Well, is there anything else that you can say about the painterliness of this? What about the use of color?
Well, she's colorful and he's not.
If you think about the use of color in the paintings of Renoir, is this anything like it? Not in the later paintings of Renoir, but do you know anything about Renoir? He's a kind of a figure that everyone's like been interested in the past 10 years or so. There've been movies about it. Wasn't Renoir's son a movie maker? Yeah. There was a film about Renoir that came out about 5 or 6 years ago. It's a spectacular film. Have you been to the Barnes?
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to compare them because, like, the way they paint skin, for example, is completely different. I know Renoir does use a lot of, like, red and pink, and it has female figures, and she has that very prominent red shawl, but that's the only similarity I can see.
Yeah, but the blending of the colors.
Oh.
Well, in a painting by Renoir, you can see like a million different colors in the face. You wouldn't be able to see blue, but over here, like the shawl is one color, it's red.
Yes, it's a very specific color,
Mm-hmm.
right? At least she's very specific. Red and green. Why red and green?
Aren't they opposed colors in the spectrum?
They can be, yes.
They're completely.
Complementary, you mean?
Yeah, completely.
But what's the other significance of those two colors? And they don't have any blending whatsoever. They're all, you know, tightly constrained in their own areas.
This might be grasping at straws, but green is like nature, life, and red could be blood, so also life in a way. I don't know.
Maybe.
They both seem very vibrant.
What are the colors on the Mexican flag?
Red, white, and green.
Uh-huh. Okay. I think that's more likely what it's a reference to. Okay. Now look at the faces. Look at Diego's face in particular. Does that, if you are familiar at all with the art of the early 20th century, let's say between you know, the transition to the 20th century around 1900 and 1930, what other European artist does a face like that look like? Both of their faces, actually. That you might see hints of. Actually, the picture with the wet nurse is more typical of another on the earlier period
Oh.
of European art.
Paul Gauguin?
Yes, Gauguin.
Yeah, I don't know how to say his name.
And then this looks like what? Not a direct correspondence, but it is in that field. And you see it represented in some of her other work.
Are we talking about a different artist or the same?
Yeah, a different artist. Is that a realistic face?
Kind of.
But it looks a little distorted, does it not?
Is this on page
Stylized?
23 or 49?
Yeah, no, the wedding picture.
Yeah.
There are other examples of it, I'm just alluding to it now. That doesn't remind you of any of the really super famous artists? Some people would say that's bad teaching because you're searching your memory banks for who I think is a super famous artist. Well, I'm going to let that go. Okay? All right.
You're not
I
gonna tell us who
encourage.
it is?
What?
You're not gonna tell us who it is?
Absolutely
You're gonna leave us
not. No. I want you to try to imagine who it might be. Look at some of these other paintings. Oh, I know what. I'll give it away right now. Look on page 26. This is also a stretch. Self-portrait. Very ugly. Look at the way the face is depicted.
Looks like one of those Roman.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just, well, it does have that quality, and you also find that in this artist that I'm talking about, and
So he.
in that person's early work.
Ooh.
Don't they have art courses here? Do you take them? Have you ever taken an art history course? You have? Have you taken a 20th century art? Probably the only thing they offer here.
Okay, this might be like barking up the wrong tree, but the small dots and the very ugly self-portrait, is that what you're making a reference to? Like pointillism?
No,
No, something
not
else.
necessarily,
Okay.
no.
Never mind. I have no
I'm
idea.
just talking about the shape of the face, the design and the kind of distortion that's in the faces.
Hmm.
Look at the painting on the facing page, she has a mustache. Okay, all right, let's put that away. And I want to do, we have to listen to some music, okay? Because this is, you know, I'm trying to get through the cavalcade of music history here. So, who's going to turn on the machine and help us listen to music?
I don't have an audio plug. Maybe someone else would be the DJ.
Quick, quick, quick!
Does anyone have an audio plug?
Everyone has an audio plug except for me, it seems. Me and Dr.
If
L
you wanna use my
are
phone.
disadvantaged.
Oh.
Really?
Yeah. Only got the lightning plug.
Will it reach?
Yeah. It's all on cable.
Alright, what am I pulling up?
I'm going to install a coffee machine in here. I've been threatening to do that for years. What?
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Get some donuts too. What recording am I pulling up?
Well, Haydn,
YouTube?
yes, Haydn, Quartet, Opus 50, number 1. There are many dreadful recordings on the internet. Do not pick the one that's in early music tuning. That really, I can't deal with that. There's one, I think it's the, is it the Amadeus Quartet? Or the, one of those,
Here's one at the Curtis Institute of Music.
no, for heaven's sake.
You don't have
What quartet did you say?
Opus 50.
No, but what was the
Amadeus.
players? Amadeus?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do the Curtis one.
I think Shannon's playing.
Really? Is there, well, I don't know. I'd probably get too violent if we did that.
You had a password drag.
Yeah, they updated the app and I don't like technology, so stop pestering me. Nope, why isn't, none of these are it?
Haydn Opus 50, number 1.
I know, but it won't
Quartet
come up when
in
I
B
just
flat
search for it
major.
because YouTube is dumb.
Just make sure you put Amadeus Quartet.
This is Tokyo, is Tokyo okay?
Well, you should, what?
Do you like the Tokyo Quartet?
All right, fine. No, but fine. Fantastic. Okay. All right. Well, what kind of piece is that? Other than it's a string quartet. What's the form of that particular movement?
Sonata.
Is it really?
It's like the
Yeah.
the recapitulation's really interesting. Or it's not really a recapitulation.
It isn't?
Not really. Like it's
Why not?
because you don't really hear the theme with the original. Like it's not the original. It's not the same as the exposition. It's changed.
Yeah.
And the transition is really different too. Like from the development to the recapitulation. Like it's not. I don't feel like it's so defined.
Oh, that's different. Yeah, I think the definition is not what you normally expect, right? Or normally associate with a
Yeah.
sonata form.
Not what I normally associate, I guess.
Yeah, well, okay, well, there isn't anything normal about this particular piece. I don't know if you were listening, but, you know, there's nothing normal about it. All right? Okay, this piece is supposed to be in the key of B flat major. Yeah? Okay, well, let's start again. Okay, let's pause it there. Those B flats in the cello, right? Are they staccato, legato, non-legato, partially legato?
Dot with the slur over 4.
It's portato, yes, right? Okay. And portato means what?
Carry like a potato.
Right. So the execution of such a marking would mean that, you know, there's like a pulsating effect, right? But the sound does not stop. It's not supposed to stop. It's actually a vocal technique, usually associated with the word what? Not portato, but
Port d'Ivoire or portamento.
Potato.
you should know, you listen to opera all the time. Verdi uses it all the time, with actually this marking, many times.
Portare?
Parlando,
Oh,
right?
but that means speaking.
Yes, it does.
He notates it that way.
Yep. In many places. Not always, but in many places. Okay, well, let's continue. Okay, right, stop right there. Right. It starts on a consonant chord, right? No?
Starts on
What is the sonority there?
F dominant.
Well, there's a B flat in the bass. How can that be at a dominant sound?
It's diminished.
Careful. It's just a pedal.
A pedal. The organ has pedals. The piano has 3. Right? So that's a dissonant sound, or it's a sound of dissonant sonority that's suspended or imposed over the tonic, right? Or the fundamental tone, right? So that's surprising. You get one B flat. Well, hopefully that tells you what the key is, maybe. And then you get this jarring suspended chord, which is a dissonant chord, by the way. You said it was a dominant 7th, right? Okay. All right, and then it goes to what? What is the top tone there?
E flat.
E flat, right? And then that precipitously moves to D.
So it's
Yeah.
like a suspension.
All right. So implied in that movement, and I think it's definitely implied, contrary to Rameau's theory, that E flat is coming from what?
F.
That's F, right, but you don't hear it, right? You just get this dissonance over the B flat, yeah? And actually the E flat in relationship to B flat is what interval? It's a fourth. So that's like a dissonant suspension that needs to come down to 3, yes? The D. The D is the significant tone, not the F or the E flat, in my opinion. Right. Okay, let's go from there. Can we go from there? Stop. Right. Okay. The D is the prominent tone, yes? All right. It does go D, F, right? But the D returns. When the D returns, what's happened to the bass voice?
G.
It's G, right? So it's actually moving B flat to G, right? Do you catch that? If you don't, you're gonna miss it all. All right? Let's hear it one more time.
From the beginning?
Yes. That sounds like a guitar. That doesn't. All right, right there. Dum, bum, bum. Don't you hear that? You have to hear it. If you don't, well, you don't, right? But what's more important in the bass? Yes. Dum, bum, bum, bum. Yeah? Is that not true?
That is definitely.
Okay. All right. Let's go on from there. And pause it for a minute. Oh, we're starting over again?
No, that was after the.
Oh, okay. This is all right. There's that whole unit is one thing. It goes re, do, si. Yes, it's closed off. Right? Let's keep going. Oh, now the chords change, right?
Well, just a little comment. Yeah.
Okay, stop right there. Now, what emerges, and I think this is, we need this because of the complication of the chromaticism. What note is now being portatoized in the top voice, or whatever voice it is? It's do. That's a signal that something has happened, yes? What has happened? If the tonality is B flat, and all of a sudden we hear this, and consider what has preceded it, what has happened?
Seems like it's gone 5.
We're moving to F major.
Yeah,
But it's not an F major chord here, is it?
but the
It's the
chord that
dominant.
precedes the C, well,
I don't know.
There are a lot of F major chords around here.
Well, there are a lot of other chords too. The C is the second degree, yes?
Passing
Re, do, si. Yep. The do is actually supporting what you would call on page 900 of the harmony book a what?
Secondary.
5 of 5, or whatever, yes? And we should anticipate that that is actually going to go to F, which is the dominant of B flat, I think, yeah? All right. So once you get to the C, things change. You hear a bunch of B flat chords, yes, but they're no longer in that specific relationship to the tonic B flat. They're inside of the F major prolongation, that chord which is being prolonged. However, that F is still in relationship to B flat, but on a larger scale, yes? And so you have the first indication of what is going to be generating the large-scale form of this piece, which is commonly called sonata form. There's a amazingly, there's a book by an interesting person whose parking meter, I think, just expired. It's called Sonata Forms. Have you ever looked at that book? I won't mention the author, but it's virtually everyone carries that book around and considers it to be like the definitive study of sonata. Well, sonata forms. Well, in my view of things, I don't think sonata is a form. It is, if you say that, it's equivalent to saying sentence forms. There might be many types of sentences, right? But they're all formed using the same principles. So I think sonata, as a basis for a large-scale music expression, is a principle rather than a form. It can generate large-scale form, but it does so in many different ways. However, there's one thing that must be there.
Moving to the dominant for the...
Well, it's not always accompanied by that motion. The one thing that must be is that the tonic starts from a consonant point. There's only one point that it can start from, and that is a beginning of in my terminology, a third space that starts above the tonic and moves to the tonic via some kind of dissonant agent. And in this key, the consonant point of origin is the D, and the dissonant element is C. If you prevent that C from moving ahead and stop it there, and prevent it from moving to the B flat and start over again, you've created a clause or a structure or an interruption. It's a defining segment of the tonality. That, in my opinion, it's also a Schenkerian idea, is the only forming device that exists in music. And it is dependent upon the relationship of consonants and dissonance. And in Schenker's discussion of sonata form, he says that if a musician cannot control that particular aspect, and he says sonata, if he can't control that, then you don't know what music is about. And you can't produce music. You can't either improvise music or you don't know what the compositional basis of music is. And I think that's very true. So if you were to translate that into a language and lit class, and you were a writing class, if you can't write sentences, you don't know what the language is. Is that not true? If you don't know how to put together sentences, complex sentences, you don't know the language. Now, I know that's a harsh remark, maybe, but I think it's pretty true. So it all has to do with understanding in an abstract way, concretely represented through your composition or your improvisation, of the importance of consonance and dissonance. That's an abstract idea, and it doesn't say that you can realize that in one or two different ways. You can realize it in a multitude of different ways. One of the significance, or the significance of Haydn, is that he clearly demonstrates in his one or two string quartets that he wrote. Right? Okay, now, most of the time, sonata is taught as a kind of rigid form. Not always, but it's usually taught that it has a rigid schema, and then there are exceptions to the rule. I don't know whether it's taught that way nowadays or here, but you know, that's a very popular way of approaching that. Well, I don't like to approach it that way because there are many different ways in which that form can be generated. And this is a quartet that's a perfect example of that, that does not do what you normally expect. But what it must do, if it's in major, it must create a kind of division in the structure by moving to a dissonant degree that is composed out, which is the second degree. You think that's a lot of words, and it is, but it's a fact. It's something that you observe in all of these pieces that are in major. It's not a stylistic thing. It's not a rigid rule. It's just a principle of organization. All right. So, did you stop it before they repeat the exposition?
It's right at the repeat sign.
Okay. Well, let's hear the repeat of the exposition, and then see what comes next. Stop it. Why is that? It may be just me, and maybe we've lost tempo before the B flat comes in again. But why does that sound like it's in the wrong tempo? Or is that just me?
Sound like I heard too fast or like double time.
Let's play it one more time. Can you back up just? I propose this, right? And on a large scale, this is gone here, right? Yep. Inside this prolongation, there is its own, like, fifth progression. So you get that. That's why this ends on F, does it not? Okay. So then there is the repeat sign. The repeat sign is there for, well, I don't know. Schinker says it's there to confirm the division in the structure that's there. So this would be 3, 2. This has its own fifth progression, which articulates this particular chord. Well, this puts this on two different levels. This is inside of that, and all of these notes are inside of this. So you have this fifth motion, which establishes that. Now, what comes after this repeat sign, right, has nothing to do with this. If it does, it would continue on down. But there is a phantom note here, which is a B flat, that's left out. That would complete the progression. The reason you hear this, in my opinion, and in Schinker's idea, is that this is kept from being completed. That it is there, but it is not voiced. It's not pronounced. So whatever happens here must refer back to this progression, must refer back to the initial tone. And so consequently, there are a variety of ways in which that could be realized. One of the ways is to reproject this, yes? So that this is cut off, this is not heard, but then you reinstitute the progression and you would have this over. This is one of the reasons why Schinker calls this the continuation section, because it is continuing the motion that is generated by the stable tone at the beginning, right? And this has a direct relationship to language and more complex sentence structures, where you have things that are omitted. Mary, his grandmother, blah, 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 blah. The comma substitutes for something that's been moved out of its normal position, right? Mary dropped dead. Mary's grandmother was in the store shopping for artichokes. That's run together, and it says Mary, comma, his grandmother, blah, 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 comma, dropped dead, right? Okay, it's related to this effect. But by no means is this the only choice here, right? As Haydn is going to show you. Okay, let's go. Is it clear so far? Stop, okay? Right, okay? So obviously, this is not related to this, is it? What is projected in the bass? Let's put this up here. It's D, right? Is it not? I mean, I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Therefore, it looks like this D is what is sustained. So it's actually a recapturing of that note. Right? Did you learn this in form class? Did you all have form here? You talked about this?
No, we just had magic boxes of learning.
It tells you a lot about the parallel period.
What is that?
I don't think any of this should be going on camera right now.
Do you actually want me to tell you?
No, I don't. That's a rhetorical statement. All right, okay. But now, this might not be a stable chord either. Let's play again from the continuation.
I will try my best.
You should use the term development for cameras and film, which they don't make anymore. Now, let's stop that. Is there any kind of reference to the opening
Yes.
here?
Rhythm. A lot of rhythm.
It's the opening note over the D, right? It's a dissonant chord. And what is on the top of that? E flat, right? Huh. Wow, isn't that interesting? Okay. All right, let's go again. Holy cow. All right, wait a minute. Let's go back to this. Somebody explain to me what happens here. I have no idea. There's so many chromatic tones. I don't know what's happening here. Play it again one more time. It's a 6/4, right? D major. Okay, what is that chord?
A flat.
Oh my gosh. How did we get there? The relationship of D to A flat is not a very nice sound. But the D doesn't really go to A flat, right?
Went down to G first, then descending.
Well, let's figure this out one more time. It's a very interesting progression, I think. First of all, this is a major chord. What's that doing in the key of B flat major?
Hanging out.
Encroaching on our diaphonicism.
5 of the
Sounding a bit like G minor.
Don't ever use those terms. D is the mediant, yes, of B flat. It's just chromaticized, right? So it might be going to some other diatonic element in the key, not it's going to A flat eventually. All right. Okay. This is why nobody. Never mind. Go ahead. Stop. Okay, right there. So we've got this on the top. All right. May I put this up here? Okay. All right. Pick up from right there.
Oh, wait.
Stop. Okay. All right. Now, what happens here?
G and the 6/4.
Yeah, do, fa, si.
That's that, right? Right, and then we want to put it up here? Yeah, let's put it up here. Okay, so re, do, si, la, yeah? I'm going to put little notes, well, no, let's do this. I don't know what I'm going to do, all right?
The bass
Yeah.
doesn't go up to do.
So let's do that, and let's do this. Isn't that a, okay.
There's still a soul in the bass though.
Yeah, it stays over, it suspends and goes so, fa, fa.
Let's play it one more time.
So
Yes,
sol,
say it.
sol flat, or fa sharp, fa.
Oh. And what goes here?
Fa sharp, fa.
Fa sharp with the
Or
B
sol
flat.
flat.
Yeah. I don't know.
And that goes too.
Fa.
Fa.
Then that's 7. Yes?
But it's not in parallel motion with that.
It is.
Yes, it is.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, this is the melodic figure. Re, do, si, la. Yes? And then what?
The F holds and
And then it goes fa, mi,
Yeah.
mi.
Doesn't it do this?
yeah.
All right.
I forget what happens
Well.
next, but the F holds when it's
No, idiot. Okay, there. All right.
Sorry. Looking forward to section. Fa flat.
Oh, so it
Right
repeats.
there.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so the F is over again, right?
Yeah.
And this is
C
major or minor?
B flat minor. 6/4.
6/4.
Yeah. So fa, D flat.
C, la, sol.
What kind of la?
Flat.
Yeah.
Mhm. So it's the same thing, right?
Yeah. And then F flat under the la flat, and moving to B flat.
E flat, the bass.
Yeah.
It's so here, yes?
Yes,
Okay,
and the bass is E flat.
I think
Yeah.
under
After
the
the chromatic, and then E flat.
so first F flat and then E flat.
okay. All right, and what should go here?
Right, flat.
That,
Is it 7?
isn't it that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it has to be because we're going to
A flat.
la flat, right? Yeah, okay, well, that's an interesting progression. All right, now let's listen to it one more time, okay?
Back from the D?
Yeah, from the D. There's something in between here, yes?
Yes, this is 6/4.
Okay, one more time. Get the E flat. Okay, so the ultimate goal of this, we've got this right, it changes to 6/3 position, and then what happens?
F minor, 6/3.
Well, the ultimate goal, where we
And then
just stopped.
D flat.
D flat, right?
After a lot of stuff.
Okay, is the A flat still up there?
Gets up to a B flat as well.
It might be F.
Well, let's listen again.
Just back
Now,
up.
wait a minute. If this is the so-called continuation section, where is the dominant?
Not there yet.
It isn't here.
I have a question.
Just one?
Yes,
Okay.
for now. You said that the continuation has to be composing out of a dissonant element. How is the D dissonant with? It's not. That's not a dissonant tone with. If this whole section is composing out of D, maybe
No,
it's not.
no, I said that the form is generated
Okay.
by the motion to this dissonant passing tone,
Oh, okay.
and that is composed out.
Okay.
Without that, there is no formal structure.
Okay. I was
Of
gonna
the
say 'cause
sonata.
D is not dissonant with B flat.
What?
The,
No!
Okay.
That's the remarkable thing about this. And I said that one strategy, which you're taught in classes in a kind of rigid way, is that the exposition moves 1 to 5, and the development section moves from 5 and diddles around with that back to 1. Yes? Well, that's a
Well, if you
that's-
like, D is 5 to 6 from our F.
what?
D is related to our F by 5 to 6, if you like.
It's more related to this, is it not?
I'm just throwing out options here.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Not
How
saying
would we
I
turn
agree.
this chord into a B flat major chord?
5 to 6.
Yeah, by that, right?
How else?
Okay. Well, that's a significant of sonorities that are related by third. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. So therefore, let's go on. Play this again. I think I'm going to stop writing.
Oh, we did go C, A flat, F,
What's that chord?
E flat.
B flat.
Right. So this goes from D flat. Does it do the same thing that this does?
Did it drop to B flat?
B, da,
flat, B flat.
It's like B flat.
I thought it
minor,
was
right?
C, A flat, F, D flat.
Listen one more time. I'm asking, is this chord composed out? Is this chord composed out the same way this chord is?
No.
Wait a minute. What's in
Yeah.
the bass here?
6-3.
It's F, right? Okay. Just like this, right? Okay. Keep going. Right there. What is that chord?
E flat. That's a
It's-
6-5, right?
E-
Not flat, B flat.
E flat, right? Yeah, it's E flat here. Is that not correct?
Isn't the bass very natural?
Keep going from there. We'll go back, all the way to the A flat sound. Right?
Oh.
What is that chord? Eventually. There's a whole bunch of junk left out in here, right? Okay, which we're running out of time. But you notice that this is some very strange thing here, but then this turns into like, what is that chord eventually? It's an augmented sixth, right?
Oh, yeah. B
And this
flat,
goes
sol,
to
C.
that, and then this goes to that, right?
So D to G.
Yeah, to G, right? Okay, well, re, do, si, la. So this turns into a large scale motion to G. Yeah? So the continuation section is actually, didn't we get this in the exposition? Where it moves to G? You tell me it was G, E flat,
I think so, yeah.
right?
B flat.
I'm blanking. I can't remember.
F, B flat,
Yeah,
right? Okay, well, this is a repetition of that on a large scale.
And it doesn't matter that it moves fairly prominently back to D before going to G during the continuation.
Well, it's a prolongation of D,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, same difference.
Is this,
Fine.
but this is a fifth progression in G,
Okay.
right? So this is supporting the third degree, yes, which is an extension of the B flat. There is no, this hooks back up to here. It has nothing to do with that chord. Then this is composed out as G, which is it's already given away over here, right? So where do you think this G is going to go?
E flat.
E flat and then to what?
F.
F. I wonder if it does that. Okay? Does it do that? Play it one more time. Play the transition again. Okay, right. It does do that, yes? But does it do it directly? Play it one more time. this. Wait a minute. Yes, okay. It doesn't go directly to the E flat. It goes to what?
C.
Hmm?
Do.
Yes, Right, and then what note does it end on at the retransition? What
D.
note is in the soprano?
D.
D. Yes. Right. So the original cadential motion at the beginning is displaced. Yes? And it returns to the tonic not by strong, root progression or whatever you want to call that, but by a contrapuntal progression. So you just kind of slide back into the repetition. But it's the end of the exposition, the continuation. The reason why it has this characteristic is because there is no dissonance implied in the continuation section. It comes out of the tonic chord. So there's no, motivation for really strong articulation. It just moves back to B flat, right? By a contrapuntal progression. Are you following what I'm saying? That's what gives this movement its distinctive characteristic. But yet it's following exactly the principles that establish sonata procedure, or this large-scale form.
There's no passing tone. Wait, sorry.
The passing tone has got to occur in the recomposition or the restatement of the opening section, the A prime section, what do you call the last section? The repetition. Right. Recapitulation. I call it the repetition. And there is a strong cadence at the end. Let's listen to this from the end. It's a 6/5. So wait a minute, it leaves out the first statement at the very beginning and goes to the second little fragment. That's what you're talking about, right? But it's exactly the same. Let's go, except different. Now, what does it do?
Basically just sequences
B-flat.
through back to B flat.
It stays in B flat, right?
It uses
What-
a lot of descending fifth sequences.
What?
It uses a lot of descending fifths of the bass, which is
Yeah, but they don't
Yeah.
have the significance of when you say descending fifth. Lurking around the corner is a harmonic sequence by fifth. Don't think of that,
okay.
right? Okay. You can think it, but don't say it to me. All right.
I'll say it.
No. Go ahead. Continue.
See what I'm doing?
What is that? Wait a minute. What is that? What is that sonority?
E flat.
E flat. All right. Keep going.
Then it goes to F immediately.
Bum, bum. Yep. So it repeats the progression: B flat, E flat, something or another, F, maybe with the G, about 3 different times,
Mhm.
but it never ever leaves B flat again. It's completely in the tonic.
Mhm.
And that is a hallmark of many recompositions or restatements or the repetitions, right? So this is clearly a very, clear-cut sonata form or sonata movement. But it has nothing to do with the kind of schema that everyone seems to think that sonata in a major key does. And, Haydn is significant because he develops this form. He develops this procedure. And when were the Opus 50 quartets composed? In the 19th century or the 18th century?
20th.
In the 20th century.
Late
Yes.
18th.
Well, I don't know how late it is. Anybody know? That'll be our parting shot today.
Wait, Opus?
Opus 50. When were they wrote?
It was wrote.
1787.
Aha. Right. Who was also active as a composer then? Mozart. Right.
Salieri.
However, it was Haydn who is you've all taught this, the father of the string quartet. Well, the reason why he's the father of the string quartet, because he's the one that actually produced the great variety that can occur in that form. And of course, it was emulated and personalized by his younger Mozart. Yeah? But it's Haydn who is the great generator of this particular form. He is the person who works out the ramifications of sonata, right? And reinstates imitative counterpoint, and from that it reincorporates the idea of creating thematic unity by having just like one theme, which is very similar to fugal technique, right? One theme, which goes through a series of transformations. All right, well, we're going to listen to one more example of sonata. But are you getting a clearer picture of what the sonata form is or sonata procedure is?
I have a question.
Another one?
Yes. Maybe this is false, but I was told that people writing music in the 18th century did not think of sonata form as like it was just the way music was written, but there wasn't like a set of instructions for it.
Exactly.
And like musicologists came up with the word sonata form and started calling it that like way after the fact.
Well, who was the first person to call it sonata form?
I have no idea.
Anton Reicha.
Oh, okay. Reicha?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
R-A-I-C-H-A. He and Beethoven played in the orchestra.
Oh.
He wrote a lot of wind quintets.
Yes.
They were any good.
Yes. He also
Oh dear.
that is
Maybe it
also
has
the
to do with
guy
sonata
that
form.
NTT and I got into a conversation about, and neither one of us knew what either one of us was talking about. I thought he was talking about Friedrich Gulda, and he was talking about Anton Reicha. And it was after a concert, and there were like 15 people standing around. And we talked to each other for like well on almost 20 minutes, not knowing what each other was talking about. And there were these great long pauses between I would say something, and then he would like wait and then say something, and I thought, what in the world is he talking about? Right? Then we had this conversation for about 15 minutes or so that neither one of us knew anything what we were talking about.
There was no actual like exchange of
It was about Anton Reicha versus Friedrich Gulda. I was talking about improvisation, and he was talking about Reicha and the fugue, those 36 fugues. And it was all apparently in relationship to the improvised fugue thing. And neither one of us knew what on earth we were talking about. So I didn't find out until we stepped outside of the theater, and everyone was like hysterically, you know, carrying on about what that was happening. And I said, well, you know, I didn't know who he was talking about. It didn't make any sense. Anyway, so it's Anton Reicha, who was also a theorist, and was the first person to describe this as a form, right? And then, of course, Czerny was instrumental in further explicating what were the components of a formal structure of a sonata. All this is good historical information in the Charles Rosen Sonata Forms book. You can read that. But jettison that. I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. It is correct. This was just a procedure of music. You know, people were writing novels or books, and they weren't, you know, writing according to any kind of schema or formula. It was just the natural properties that are built into the language itself. And besides that, this particular movement has the unmistakable character of something that Haydn thought of while he was having breakfast and just like wrote it down. You know, there was no like hair pulling or consulting the, you know, Harvard Dictionary of Music about what chord is going to come next. That is just completely alien to all of these people, right? It's a natural, spontaneous effort. And Haydn is saying something to us about himself, right? Okay. Somehow this all connects with the Hickey essay, which I think is one of the most difficult essays of his, and very strong. And I think that's one of the reasons why it occurs towards the end of the book. But if you have not read it, please read it. We will discuss it, and we'll try to tie all of this stuff together, Kahlo, that essay, and Haydn and his Revolutions on the Sonata Form. Thank you very much for your enthusiastic participation. See you next week.